You ever get that gut feeling someone's messing with you, but you've got no proof? That's where I was, until a $29 hidden camera changed everything. What started as a missing garden gnome turned into a neighborhood scandal none of us will forget. My name's Jake, and I live in one of those neighborhoods where everything looks perfect on the surface. You know the type. Sidewalks so clean they look power-washed daily. Not a single trash can left out longer than regulation allows, and lawns trimmed so precisely you'd swear a laser level was involved. The kind of place where stepping outside, in pajama pants to grab the mail earns you judgmental glances and whispered disapproval. When I first moved in, I thought I'd lucked out. A quiet community, safe streets, friendly-looking neighbors who waved even if they didn't know your name. It was the American dream with a picket fence filter. But perfection, I've come to realize, usually has a cost. In this case, it was spelled HOA, the Homeowners Association, or, as some neighbors who'd been around longer put it, the horrors of authority. Karen was the queen of it all, middle-aged, tight blonde curls, always in crisp pastel polos and capri. She was the kind of person who carried a clipboard for casual strolls, always taking notes, probably on whether someone's grass exceeded the 2.5-inch limit. She smiled, sure, but it never touched her eyes. The woman had the energy of someone who'd run out of hobbies and decided controlling a suburb was the next logical step. 6 months into my new life in suburbia, I was still figuring out where I fit in. I waved at neighbors, made small talk about weather and local schools even though I didn't have kids, and slowly made my backyard into a space I could actually enjoy. That's when I brought out Gnome. Norman was a garden gnome, 2 feet, tall, red hat, white beard, holding a little fishing rod with a smile that always made me chuckle. My mom gave him to me as a housewarming gift, saying, "Everyone needs a little watchman for their garden." I thought it was silly at first, but Norman grew on me. He added a splash of personality to the otherwise cookie-cutter yard. I placed him next to the hydrangeas near the walkway where he'd greet anyone coming up to the house. 2 days later, he was gone. Not knocked over, not moved, just vanished. At first I thought maybe a kid from down the street took him as a joke. It's a gnome after all, not exactly a high-value target. I looked around the block, even checked the community playground. Nothing. That's when I noticed the envelope taped to my door. It was HOA letterhead, naturally, typed in formal, emotionless language that somehow still felt passive-aggressive. Unapproved lawn ornament removed. That's all it said. No name, no explanation, no apology. Just that my gnome had been removed. Like it was garbage day and Norman was a leftover pizza box someone decided didn't belong. My first reaction was confusion. I'd seen other houses with decorations, a flamingo or two, a whimsical windmill, even a frog statue holding a solar-powered lantern. Were they in violation too? Or was Norman being unfairly targeted? The more I thought about it, the more it burned. I hadn't done anything wrong. There was nothing in the HOA guidelines I'd read that banned garden gnomes. Decorative elements in good taste and moderation were supposedly allowed, so why was mine singled out? I knocked on a few neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had seen what happened or knew anything. Most just gave me awkward smiles and shrugged. A couple told me, in hushed tones, that Karen was known for enforcing rules that aren't technically written down. One guy, Mike, a retired Army vet, chuckled and said, "If she don't like it, she'll make it disappear. That's how it works around here." That's when the paranoia set in. I started watching my yard like it was Area 51. Was someone watching me? Was Karen driving by, taking pictures? I wouldn't have been surprised. The weirdest part was how sneaky it felt. If someone had knocked on my door and said, "Hey, the gnome's against the rules," maybe we could have talked. But just removing it like some kind of midnight raid? That was personal. So I started thinking, if they got rid of Norman without so much as a courtesy knock, what else might they take issue with? My patio chairs? The bird feeder? My car, if I parked it facing the wrong way? I know it sounds ridiculous, getting so worked up over a gnome, but it wasn't just the statue. It was what it meant. That someone thought they had the right to decide what belonged on my property without even asking. That they could act in the shadows and not be held accountable. That was what gnawed at me, and that's when I decided I wasn't going to let it go. See, I'm not one for confrontations. I wasn't about to yell or write angry emails with too many exclamation marks. But I do believe in evidence. Cold, hard, proof. If someone was sneaking around my property, removing things, I was going to catch them in the act. I went online and started looking up hidden cameras. There were fancy ones, sure, disguised as birdhouses or porch lights. But the one that caught my eye was cheap and clever, a little camouflaged camera that looked like a rock. It had night vision, motion detection, the works. And it was on sale. I ordered it immediately. When it arrived 2 days later, I placed it carefully in the flower bed just a few feet from where Norman used to stand. Then I bought a decoy gnome, a slightly cheaper one, this one holding a welcome sign, and put him right back in the same spot. Bait, a trap, disguised in cheerful colors and ceramic whimsy. Every night after that, I checked the camera feed. Nothing the first night, or the second. But I had a feeling, call it spite or just stubborn determination, that whoever had taken Norman wouldn't be able to resist the new one. And I was right. 2 nights after I planted the decoy gnome and set up the hidden rock camera, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and the kind of anticipation that keeps you just on the edge of your seat. It felt like I was running a sting operation from a movie, except instead of drug lords or jewel thieves, I was targeting someone stealing ceramic lawn decor. Still, there was adrenaline. I checked the footage obsessively, fast-forwarding through hours of nothing but gently swaying hydrangeas and the occasional squirrel passing through like a shady character. On the 3rd night, something happened. I had just gotten back from work, still wearing my badge and tie, and settled into my usual routine: dinner, dishes, camera check. I opened the app, expecting to see more of the same: empty yard, wind rustling the leaves, maybe a rabbit sniffing around. But at 11:43 p.m., the motion sensor lit up. I hit play. There she was, Karen, in the flesh. Or more accurately, in garden gloves, a zip-up hoodie, and those unmistakable neon pink running shoes I'd seen her wear during her morning power walks. She walked into frame with the stiff kind of caution only someone doing something sketchy thinks looks normal. Her head was turning from side to side, scanning the street like she was in a spy movie, eyes darting to the left, then the right. She crept up my walkway and crouched down right in front of the bait gnome. I couldn't believe it. This wasn't just speculation anymore. I wasn't crazy. This woman, the president of the HOA, was literally sneaking into my yard under cover of darkness to steal garden decorations. She hesitated for a second, looking back over her shoulder as if maybe she sensed the camera. Then, like a raccoon grabbing a shiny object, she snatched the gnome up and stuffed it into a large canvas tote bag. A monogrammed tote bag because, of course it was. She stood up, adjusted her visor, yes, a visor at night, and walked quickly back down the path and out of frame, vanishing into the shadows like a suburban ninja. I sat there for a long minute, just blinking at the screen, processing the absurdity of what I'd seen. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny exactly, but because the level of petty commitment it took for this woman to execute a midnight gnome. Heist was just too much. She could have sent a letter. She could have knocked on my door. She could have cited some obscure HOA rule, made up or not, and at least attempted to be diplomatic. But no, she had to go full Ocean's 11 on my flower bed. Saved the footage, not just on the app, but in 3 different places: laptop, USB drive, and cloud storage. If my house caught on fire that night, I'd be running out with that USB stick like it was a birth certificate. The next morning, I went about my business like it was any other day. I watered the plants. I waved to the neighbors. I even saw Karen, jogging past my driveway in her pastel tracksuit, waving at me with that same tight, thin-lipped smile she always wore. The kind that said, "Good morning, neighbor," while silently judging your garbage bin placement. I smiled back and gave her a big, cheerful wave. She had no idea. It was surreal, talking to her like nothing had happened, knowing she'd crept into my yard like a cat burglar less than 8 hours earlier. I wondered how many other residents had experienced this sort of thing. How many missing? Bird feeders, wind chimes, and lawn ornaments had been chalked up to accidents or coincidence when really it was Karen on a crusade against what she deemed inappropriate decor. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept watching the footage over and over. Not because I doubted what I saw, but because it felt too bizarre. This was supposed to be a peaceful neighborhood, a place where people borrowed sugar and hosted barbecues, not where the HOA president executed covert raids on ceramic gnomes. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had a decision to make. Do I confront her? Do I send the video to the HOA board? Do I post it online and let the internet do what the internet does? I toyed with all those ideas, each one tempting in its own way. But what I really wanted, what I needed, was for people to see what she'd done. Because if Karen was this bold with me, imagine what else she might be doing behind closed doors or under the cover of darkness. So I started preparing. I double-checked the HOA meeting schedule. Monthly, first Tuesday, community center at 7 p.m. That gave me 3 days. I polished up the footage, added a timestamp overlay, and even made a short highlight reel so it would play clearly on a projector. I tested the HDMI cable with my laptop just to be sure. It felt ridiculous and over the top, but also necessary. There was something almost poetic about presenting my case not with accusations or anger, but with undeniable visual evidence. Those 3 days dragged on. I saw Karen twice during that time. Once while walking my dog, she smiled and commented on the weather, and once while driving past my house slowly, eyes lingering just a moment too long on my front yard, now empty of gnomes. Maybe she was looking for another target. Maybe she was checking to see if I'd replaced the decoy. Either way, I didn't react. I didn't give her any reason to think the trap had been sprung. When the day of the HOA meeting finally arrived, I felt like I was heading into court. I dressed nice, not overly formal, but enough to show I meant business. I packed my laptop, charger, and cables like a prosecutor preparing for trial. And the whole time I kept thinking about that ridiculous moment. 11:43 p.m., Karen's tote bag, the slow tiptoe across my flower bed like she was defusing a bomb. I knew I had her, and I couldn't wait for everyone else to see it. The night of. The HOA meeting finally came around, and honestly I was feeling a mix of excitement and nerves that I hadn't expected. It was one of those community center affairs, fluorescent lighting, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a long rectangular table up front with a half-dozen board members sitting behind it like a jury ready to pass judgment. People milled around, chatting quietly, sipping from styrofoam cups of lukewarm coffee, exchanging small talk about who had the best Halloween decorations or whether the new speed bumps on Elm Street were really necessary. I found a seat near the middle of the room, laptop in my lap, my phone discreetly set to silent but ready to record if needed. I wasn't sure how the room would react when I brought this up. I mean, who wants to hear a guy complain about a garden gnome? But I wasn't there just for a silly decoration. I was there to expose something deeper, something that revealed the real dynamics in our neighborhood. The meeting kicked off with the usual business, approving minutes, discussing landscaping contracts, complaints about street parking. Then finally, the moment came for miscellaneous concerns, the catch-all agenda item where residents could bring up anything not already covered. I raised my hand, heart pounding, and when the chair called on me, I stood. Good evening. Everyone, I started, trying to keep my voice steady but loud enough for the whole room to hear. I'd like to address a concern that's been bothering me, and I think many of you, about some recent actions taken by the HOA, specifically regarding the removal of personal property from residents' yards without notification or explanation. There was a quiet murmur from the crowd. I could tell I had their attention. I'm sure many of you know my name, Jake, and live at 37 Maple Drive. A few days ago, a garden gnome was removed from my front yard. At first, I thought it was a mistake or perhaps a neighbor's prank. Then I received a notice from the HOA saying it had been removed because it was unapproved. But here's the thing. I never received any prior warning or a chance to discuss this. I paused and clicked my remote to project the laptop screen onto the big projector hanging from the ceiling. And then, I continued, I set up a camera to see what was happening after hours. This is what I caught. The room darkened as the video played. There she was, Karen, the HOA president, tiptoeing into my yard like she was sneaking into a bank vault. The footage showed her crouching by the flower bed, grabbing the decoy gnome, stuffing it into her canvas tote bag, then slipping away under the streetlights. Gasps and murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people exchanged shocked looks. Others whispered incredulously. Karen sat frozen, her face betraying no emotion at first, but I could see her lips tighten and her eyes flick toward the screen. When the video ended, the room was silent for a beat. Then a voice from the back, a neighbor I barely knew, spoke up. "Is that Karen?" "Yes," I replied. "That's the HOA president, caught removing property from a resident's yard without permission." Karen stood up, her face now flushed a deep red. She cleared her throat and said, "This is a gross misunderstanding. The items I removed were hazards, safety hazards, not allowed by our community standards. I was acting within my duties to keep our neighborhood safe and beautiful." I shook my head. "There was no warning, no notice, and a gnome. How is that a safety hazard?" She glanced around, then said quietly, "The bylaws give me the authority to enforce community standards." A few people nodded, but many looked skeptical. I spoke again. "Authority isn't a free pass to sneak into people's yards in the dead of night. If we want to keep our neighborhood safe and beautiful, let's do it with respect and transparency." The chairperson tried to move things along, but the tension was thick. I could tell Karen was rattled. Halfway through the meeting, she abruptly stood and said she had urgent personal matters and left without taking questions. After she left, the board had to address the fallout. Several members admitted they were unaware of her nocturnal activities and expressed concern about her methods. One board member suggested implementing clearer policies on HOA enforcement and better communication with residents. By the end of the meeting, it was clear Karen's days as HOA president were numbered. The board promised to review the bylaws and find a way to prevent this kind of overreach in the future. Walking home afterward, I felt a strange mix of relief and satisfaction. I hadn't set out to embarrass anyone, but standing up and showing the truth was necessary. People deserve to live in a community where rules are followed fairly and where no one has to worry about their gnomes disappearing in the middle of the night. From that night on, I became somewhat of a local figure. Neighbors stopped me on the street to thank me for speaking up. Some even joked about setting up their own cameras. Karen, of course, was nowhere to be seen around the neighborhood. Rumors spread that she'd resigned quietly and was already looking for a new place to volunteer her controlling tendencies. As for me, I made sure Norman was safe, and I started thinking about what other small battles in this perfect neighborhood might need uncovering. Because sometimes the quietest places hide the loudest secrets, and it takes a little courage, and maybe a hidden camera, to bring them into the light. A week after the HOA meeting, things in the neighborhood felt different. There was a new kind of energy in the air, like the calm after a storm or the first breaths of spring after a long winter. The kind of energy that comes when people realize they're not just living in a postcard perfect place, but in a community where everyone deserves respect and where power can be challenged. The morning after the meeting, I found an email from the HOA board waiting in my inbox. It was terse and formal, but the message was clear. Karen had resigned from her position as HOA president, effective immediately, citing personal reasons. There was no mention of the video, no apology, no explanation beyond the usual corporate speak. The email ended with a promise that the board would be reviewing and revising enforcement policies to prevent any future misunderstandings. For a moment, I sat back in my chair, a strange mix of satisfaction and disbelief washing over me. The woman who had been the neighborhood's self-appointed sheriff was gone. Just like that. No fuss, no fanfare, just a quiet exit. That afternoon, as I took the trash cans out to the curb, I noticed something new on my doorstep. It was a small box, wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. Curious, I brought it inside and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was Norman, the original garden gnome, wrapped carefully in bubble wrap, his bright red hat peeking out like a beacon. There was no note, no signature, just Norman, back where he belonged. I couldn't help but smile. Whoever returned, him had done it anonymously, like a secret act of kindness, or maybe a small peace offering. It felt almost poetic, like Norman had come home after a long exile, but I didn't put him back outside. Not yet. I set Norman on a shelf in the living room, right under a spotlight I installed. It was silly, I guess, turning a garden gnome into a kind of trophy, but it felt right, like a monument to the battle that had been fought and won, not just over a ceramic statue, but over the principle of fairness and respect. Neighbors started to take notice. People came over for coffee and saw the display, asking about the story behind the little gnome glowing under the light. I told them, sometimes with a laugh, sometimes more seriously, about how Norman had become a symbol of standing, up for what's right. The gnome, it seemed, had become a silent witness to the neighborhood's awakening. With Karen gone, the HOA meetings changed, too. The board was more transparent, more willing to listen. New policies were introduced that required written warnings. Before any enforcement action, clear guidelines on what was allowed and what wasn't, and most importantly, a commitment to respect residents' privacy and property. I also installed 2 more garden gnomes in the front yard, both cemented into the ground so no one could walk off with them. They were a little cheeky, one holding a tiny welcome sign, the other with a miniature camera painted onto his hat. It was a joke, of course, but also a reminder. And the hidden rock camera? It's still there, tucked in the flower bed, watching. Over the yard, just like Norman used to. Sometimes I catch myself smiling at it, knowing that sometimes a little vigilance is necessary, even in the quietest neighborhoods. Life in the neighborhood settled back into its usual rhythm, but something had changed. The community felt more connected, more willing to speak up, and more protective of their rights. People talked more openly about issues, and a few neighbors even started their own neighborhood watch group, less about policing each other, more about supporting one another. One afternoon, while chatting with Mrs. Rivera from across the street, she told me about how she'd had problems with someone repeatedly parking in her spot. Instead of getting angry or calling the HOA immediately, she talked to the person directly, and the issue was resolved with a friendly conversation. It was a small victory, but felt huge compared to the old ways. Even the local kids seemed to sense the shift. They started organizing impromptu block parties and bike rides, no longer feeling like they had to sneak around or stay indoors to avoid the watchful eyes of the HOA patrol. I often think about how a simple garden gnome sparked all of this, how something so small and silly can uncover bigger truths about control, freedom, and respect. Gnomes are, after all, just statues. But in this story, Norman became a symbol of resistance and community. Sometimes I wonder if Karen will ever come back. Maybe she's out there, looking for another neighborhood to manage, with an iron fist and a monogrammed tote bag. I hope not. I hope she learned that people want to be part of a community, not under constant surveillance or fear of arbitrary rule-making. As for me, I've grown into my role in the neighborhood. I'm no longer just the new guy. I'm someone people come to when they need advice or want to discuss issues. And it feels good to know that standing up for what's right can make a difference, even if it starts with a garden gnome. In the end, the lesson is simple. Never underestimate the power of small things and quiet courage. Sometimes it's the smallest statue, the tiniest camera, or the softest voice that sparks the biggest change. And sometimes, a little mischief in the night can lead to daylight breaking over a whole community.